He was awesome. Thank you so much for making that happen.
Wow, you saved me.
Oh, you're ready. We're like ready to go. Oh, I got my warm up to do. Okay, good. Welcome, everyone. I'm Alan Murray, and we're here in the Deloitte Green Room at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. And the topic of the moment is mobility. And I've already said to the panel, it is somewhat ironic that we're talking about mobility in a crowded ski town where there is none at the moment. Well, glad to be here and not out on the street where there's a complete traffic jam. Have a great panel to talk about this, starting from the left, Scott Corwin, who runs mobility for Deloitte. Ross Perot, who has an interesting project going on in Texas that he can talk about. He's chairman of the Perot Companies. Swami, I'm going to make you pronounce your last name so I don't make a mess of it.
Siva Subramanian.
Siva Subramanian. We're going to call him Swami from now on. But Swami is responsible for all artificial intelligence and machine learning at Amazon Web Services, and Penny Nass, who runs public affairs at UPS, which also has some fascinating experiments going on. But Scott, I want you to frame this for us, first of all, because we've made a decision today not to talk about mobility of people, but to talk about mobility of things, of goods. And I think we've made that decision in part because the panel believes that those things are coming at us faster than some of the autonomous people movement.
So, Alan, thank you very much. This is your fourth year moderating this panel for us, these live streams. We really appreciate it. I want to thank Ross and Swami and Penny for joining us. We did very consciously decide to make this about the frontier or front lines of what's going on in the movement of goods. And there is an awful lot going on. So you think about, just to sort of set the context a little bit, we are seeing a massive growth in e-commerce and the exponential sort of growth of home deliveries. We're seeing rising population growth. We're seeing increased consumer spending in developing markets. We're seeing actually fairly well entrenched transportation networks that now digitization is sort of opening up new possibilities. And I think we'll get into today, in the course of this, some of the sort of friction points that exist in this around how do you create more of a connected community? How do we enable more agility across the supply chain? How do we augment work? I think that those are the topics that we'd like to get into today. But it's a really exciting frontier. Just to give you one statistic, in China a couple of years ago, they were averaging sort of 50 million deliveries, and now they're up to 157 million deliveries. In the United States, and Penny can quote these numbers far better than I can, we're up to more than 100 deliveries per household per year. I mean, so it's growing really rapidly. And the key to this, if we get it right, is we take cost out, we take friction out, we take time out. The fact that we can speed and accelerate from point to point is where all the value is derived, and it's a B2B value that ultimately translates to lower consumer prices. And that is really what I think a lot of this is about.
So we have a lot to talk about, and I want to dive right in. Penny, if I can start with you, David Abney, your boss, the CEO of UPS, was at the Fortune Global Forum in Paris a couple of months ago, and he said there, we are going to see autonomous movement of goods within the year. And he talked a little bit about a fascinating experiment you guys have going on in the medical area in Raleigh, North Carolina. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how quickly you think that's going to transfer?
Sure. So for today's panel, I think a couple of things that are going to come through. So when Scott was talking about some of the trends, I would throw out another one, which is urbanization. So we sit kind of at the cusp of, or at the intersection of, e-commerce and urbanization. And I think that's also driving a lot of the efficiencies and innovations that are coming up in the mobility space, and I think we'll delve into that a little bit later. One of the things we're doing is we're working on creating a smart logistics network. So we're looking at how to take technology and incorporate that in improving logistics. And in particular, we're looking at and have launched a lot of pilot projects with drones. So the one you're talking about in particular is a project we have at WakeMed in Raleigh, North Carolina, where we use drones to deliver I believe it's test samples across the campus, cutting out what would be kind of a circuitous drive around this hospital complex, and instead having a drone that flies much faster. So now instead of sitting and waiting for the results of your test for 30 to 45 minutes, you get those test results back quite a bit faster. So we're seeing the application of these technologies starting out in places like medical healthcare because of both the need for it and the absolute urgency that these deliveries require, and also the economics of it. It's a flight that replaces a longer drive, and it has a real value to it. So there's a lot of work to be done in the drone space still, but we see that coming up very, very quickly, and we are expanding and have received our license to run commercial drone flights from the FAA.
Yeah, fascinating. And Swami, when you're talking about the movement of goods, in addition to autonomous and drones and so forth, just logistics becomes so important. I know you're spending some time working on that. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, actually, so AWS, we actually see a lot of customers, especially in the logistics and transportation, where Amazon itself is a customer. As many of you probably know, Amazon probably delivers billions of packages every year, and we have even...
You guys are kind of competing with each other, aren't you? I mean, is it okay that you're sitting next to each other? Are you okay with this, Penny?
We call it frenemies. We're friends.
Frenemies.
We are a great partner.
We're great partners in many ways, and on some things we compete.
Okay,
but I would say
we'll try.
Overall, we're good friends.
We'll try and keep it on the friendly side for the purposes of today's discussion.
But from the AWS perspective, though, Amazon.com uses AWS, and the heart of even Amazon.com, how it actually does all the way from like taking a customer order, fulfilling, and delivering is powered by machine learning and AI. Yep. Right from like every product, we actually use forecasting algorithms and powered by AWS to predict how many orders are going to be for a given product every day, and actually forecast. And then in the fulfillment center, we use robotics, and actually at the end, we also work with delivery partners and even our own delivery things like Amazon Flex to actually tell what routes to take. But beyond Amazon, we even work with companies like, I talked about Convoy with you.
So tell us about Convoy.
Yeah, so Convoy is a very interesting Seattle-based logistics company which is looking to disrupt the $700 billion trucking industry. So if you look at actually in US, the trucking space, it's actually quite ad hoc and manual, where there is like the process of matching the supply and demand is done through spreadsheets and actually done by humans. And this has resulted in something up to like 40% of empty truck miles, where when truckers are driving 40% of the time, it's actually on an empty truck. So what Convoy did, running on actually some of the machine learning infrastructure in AWS, is they're able to do an interesting matchmaking algorithm, which actually takes into account where a given driver is, where is the actually demand coming from, and what is the best route they could take, and also to reduce the carbon emissions. So they are able to improve the end-to-end in such an interesting way. So much interesting.
A huge opportunity there in terms of the environment and in terms of cost.
And actually savings even for even the customer who's requesting to delivery of these goods as well. So.
Ross, in Texas, everything is big, including the experiments you do in the mobility area.
It is.
Talk about the Texas
Well,
Alliance.
the Alliance Texas program, and Amazon's a great client, and UPS is a great client, along with FedEx and BN Santa Fe Railroad. And so we have a 27,000-acre program with rail, air, interstate, fiber, backbone, and we're developing a very large technology transportation park. 61,000 people work there today. So working with Deloitte, we're working on the mobility. How do we make Alliance Texas the test bed for these new ideas? Because we're able to do, with our relationship with Bell Helicopter, we're able to work on the new industrial drones that maybe we'll pick up containers one day and do very heavy lifts across the Alliance Texas program, or the autonomous truck. Since we control the roads, you can practice going from a railroad yard to a warehouse within a confined area. And that's our big focus. And then we're Uber's partner for Uber Elevate, and we're helping Uber on the real estate side, enabling them to start their Elevate product in the North Texas market. And next year, they should start flying point A to B from Frisco and to DFW Airport. And we work with all the political overlay to make this happen. So it's a high-growing area, wide variety of use cases that has worked out very well. And our goal as real estate developers is to make sure that we're taking good care of the Amazons and the UPSs, the FedExes, giving them the facilities they need so they can compete.
So what is it going to take to roll that kind of a experience out more broadly? We can see from these examples what huge opportunities are out there, but what are the things that stand in the way from broader adoption?
So when you look around the globe and you look at sort of mobility innovation, what we're seeing are sort of pilot sites, test sites. They tend to be more geographically constrained because you're dealing inside, residential areas or commercial areas. There are very few places that have the magnitude of what Alliance Texas has, but it's even more than that. It's actually the concentration of assets and all these players in terms of the supply chain and logistics. So there is kind of a theory being tested here that there is a natural convergence, that you can create a holistic ecosystem to actually scale these things. And I think if you can do that in these environments where you have sort of the ability to get public sector and public policy aligned with you, then it may speed up the adoption, because it'll be very, very hard to actually replicate what exists in this particular environment.
But Penny, this gets back to your point about urbanization. I mean, it's one thing to talk about doing this on 27,000 acres in Texas. It's another thing to talk about doing it in one of our chaotic cities. Most cities are quasi-chaotic. How quickly will that happen, and what stands in the way from it happening?
Yeah, so just in general, I think what's happening in the world is, and we at UPS had a panel on this morning with the head of ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, and she talked at length about where we are in the regulatory framework. So there's pilots, but in order to really scale this up, we also need to start having the right regulatory frameworks and some of the frameworks in place that are going to be needed to give that assurance to the public with regards to safety. And I think we at UPS, not only are we looking at drones, but we also run one of the world's largest airlines. And we have a lot of pilots. And we want to make sure that our planes, while these things are flying around, are also safe. So I think part of that is getting the regulatory structures embedded, whether that's air traffic management, whether that's geofencing around airports, whether that's some of the other outstanding questions that we have and that we need to deal with, drones operating outside of line of sight, which require good technological backdrops to support those. I think those are some of the big things that we need to resolve, and that's something that's both rural, suburban, and
Yeah,
urban.
I was going to say that's hugely, airspace, FAA, you do have national regulation, but then very quickly you're dealing with a myriad of local regulators, aren't you? It makes it very complicated to pull off.
It's intriguing, I would say. It's an intriguing challenge. But I think that's where we're headed, and you see certain jurisdictions moving forward. So going back, we were talking before the panel, we ran a pilot with the Gavi Alliance in Rwanda. And so just very quickly, we ran a pilot where we flew an aircraft. It was, and it carried blood supplies. And we were able to do that in Rwanda because it's a country with a very uncomplicated airspace. And so that was one of the areas where we were able to really test this and the use case, and it was very successful. We rolled it out in a few other places. But that's one reason why we were able to pilot it in that country, was fairly uncomplicated airspace controlled by the government, and it created a great test lab.
What would keep us from doing the same sort of thing with, say, organ delivery here in the U.S.? I mean, that can be pretty important. 30 minutes can make the difference. Is there anything stopping us from doing that sort of thing?
Again, I think it just goes back to the safety questions, and there is concerns, community concerns. There's noise concerns. There's other concerns that we need to think about. And I think we all need to get comfortable with that. The regulations need to come. The technology is going to run ahead a little bit of the regulations, which is, I think, appropriate. But that's where I think that one of the key enablers we're going to need is that bringing that larger regulatory framework to scale.
Yeah. Yeah, but let's talk a little bit about the infrastructure. I mean, how quickly is the infrastructure going to be built out to support 5G, ubiquitous intelligence, AI, and all these different, all of it necessary to make the system work in a safe way?
Actually, it's coming sooner than later. I'll give a few customer examples that are actually happening right now. For instance, Too Simple is an autonomous driving and company for logistics, and they are doing some really amazing work powered by deep learning for actually building like autonomous driving of transportation of goods. And they have actually tested hundreds of miles. And if you unpack a truck on what it happens within an autonomous driving vehicle, they basically run hundreds of machine learning models, all the way from like one machine learning model that looks for what kind of car runs in the road, then what kind of obstacle is there, another machine learning model. So there is almost like a giant onboard computing power, and they are able to train all these things in the cloud and then deploy it at the edge. And now one of the key things they are able to do is now even really actually run for hundreds of miles, fully autonomous vehicle. And the same kind of AI-powered autonomous capability that she talked about is also we are starting to see in drones, like Amazon Prime Air drones is another example, and I'm sure some of the stuff what you're doing too. So the convergence of actually the cloud and AI is really unleashing a lot of innovation in the autonomous space, especially in the mobility area as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Ross, what are you learning in your experiment in Texas on where the...
I think if we can just go back a moment, the drone technology is not that new. Our military has been using it for decades. And, out of line of sight flying, our military Air Force has been doing that for probably 20 years. And all the drones you see around the world, a lot of that, it's all outside of line of sight. So the technology's there for the military and the intelligence community. Now can you bring it back to the civilian community? And that's what we're in the process of doing. And the public attitude, the reason I think Texas works so well is we have a very positive public-private partnership culture in Texas. So our governor's excited about this. Our mayors are excited about this. DFW Airport could have stopped Uber Elevate. And DFW Airport said, no, let's go. We want to be the first airport in the country to work out Uber Elevate. And so it's this attitude that allows us to work. In our local FAA, we have the Southwest region right on the Alliance Texas program. And so our local FAA is, they're going to be safe with people, which they need to be, but they are very open-minded. They know it's going to come. They want it to be there, and they know this can be a great U.S. industry that will generate great U.S. jobs. So our country, we've seen, they've been very good.
But, to keep that momentum going, though, you got to show the benefits pretty quickly, right? I mean, Uber expanded rapidly because the benefits were obvious. And people very quickly understood the benefits, and they said to their politicians, let me have it, in most cases, a few exceptions. But where in the next year are we going to see tangible benefits that make people say, ooh, I want more of that?
I think in the U.S., it's going to be this organ transfer, which is going on now in L.A. And this is one where it's critical to life, and I think people are willing to accept it. Scott, probably for sure. But, I mean, this is moving, and that will be the use case. But a lot of times, a company like an Uber is going to have to be aggressive to pioneer it. And then will the client pay what's necessary to save 35 or 40 minutes? Uber Elevate is now in New York, and they're doing shuttles in New York. And so it's being pioneered. But the vision is over 20,000 flying vehicles over major U.S. cities. And you're using Uber Elevate like you use Uber today. That is their vision. So you need a big ground infrastructure to allow and enable that. And that's where we're helping on.
Yeah. So I do think in the near term, we're going to look at things that there isn't a price elasticity. So when you talk about sort of medical-related life and death, I mean, if you've been to Rwanda, it is incredibly mountainous. It is not easy by ground transportation. Saving a life, there is no price you can put on it. So it's not about pizza boxes. And in the near term, I do think what you're seeing is that the manufacturers are building much more heavy-duty, industrial grade, and we're moving from the hobbyists, which in a way have shown us some of the potential of things, to really the mainstreaming of what this industry is. So then the question is it sort of time-dependent where people will be willing to pay the higher sort of incremental price in the near term, and you can scale and you build all of the supporting systems. There are cities where they're beginning to think about the three-dimensional space, how they're going to potentially price for the use of it, no different than other kind of user fees. You've got all of this sort of multilateral kind of governance that needs to be dealt with. But I do think it's akin to some of these other forms of mobility that I think Penny's spot on. The technology is getting ahead of the regulators. And the only thing I hope is that we don't have some stupid accident, kind of like we had, with an AV in Phoenix, because some of that stuff will slow down potentially.
But we will, won't we?
Inevitably.
I mean,
inevitably.
That stuff happens. You made the point, Scott, that we've been having this conversation for 4 years. Have you seen as much progress in the past 4 years as you would have predicted 4 years ago?
So you love to ask me that question every year. So on certain things, I think that there are shiny objects, and we tend to focus on the metrics of the shiny objects. So today, can you get into an autonomous drive vehicle that's going to take you anywhere in most countries? No. But the technology is moving. We're beginning to see actually commercial fleets like the Waymo one in Phoenix. And there are tipping points that are going to happen. But I don't think we should fixate so much on the shiny objects. I actually think we should focus on, so when you talk about urban mobility and you go back to the movement of people, it's how do we stitch that you go from point A to point B seamlessly, and how do we move more people more efficiently, more equitably? There's a lot of progress going on, and generally a lot of that's through either the new forms of micro-mobility or shared mobility, where we're getting more use of the assets that are becoming way more efficient.
Well, there are also, Penny, the demands. Consumers are just getting more and more used to the notion that they can order something and have it quickly, and so and both Amazon and UPS have made good progress in doing that with existing technology. But how soon do you anticipate, you're going to have people saying, "Hey, I need some milk and I need it before dinner time"?
Yeah, so I think we already have those people with those expectations. And we already have quite a few people that are thinking of case studies and where they would like to deploy this technology. Another one that's fairly obvious is any kind of delivery to a ship or from a ship back to the shore.
Yeah.
That's another huge area of potential that could come up fairly rapidly. So
it doesn't happen now.
Some of it does.
No, the Navy does.
The Navy does.
The Navy uses, the military, again, it can push this a lot harder than the civilian side.
Yeah.
So the Navy has drone delivery ship to ship, which is a great product for the Navy.
And there's some other examples too. So it's also from a safety perspective, it's easier because you're going over water.
Right.
So there's certain examples like that are already out there, and we have hundreds of customers who would be very happy to move forward with certain case studies here. We're continuing to kind of work through all of these case studies and to look for those examples that are really going to help us with developing what we need to know and developing those cases that are going to be good. Because going back to the movement of mobility and the movement of goods, a lot of this is still there's a lot of stuff because of the urbanization issue where we're still back at basics. Where how to get stuff to people in cities. There may be a day where drones land on the roof and drop off, a bunch of packages that then are distributed throughout a high rise. But until that day, we're still looking at the basics of how to get stuff into cities that are increasingly shutting off their city centers and getting stuff to people within a couple hours, within a day, within 2 days, depending on how big it is. And those are still all challenges that we see and that we're grappling with above and beyond trying to roll out drones and autonomous and a lot of the other technologies.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll quickly add to, even if you look at Southeast Asia, so one of our customers, I remember talking to them, Grab is a very popular, logistics and transportation company. They do both. And one of the challenges that they have, Southeast Asia, if you're driven there, it's very complex and so forth. So predicting even actually what is the time of delivery and so forth is hard. So let alone then you have to build a matchmaking system between supply and demand. So this is where one of the key aspects of actually many of these future mobility systems is around actually being data driven and actually applying intelligence. I mean, this is going to underpin most of the future logistics and transportation systems in a big way.
Pay attention to the data.
Data.
Grab's an interesting example because their whole business model is based on the premise of immobility in the city, right? They're on motorcycles and they can go around the cars that are gridlocked in the streets. Are they using data and data analysis to?
In a big way, actually. So they collect huge amount of data points, and they actually have even built, since I'm an AI guy, I see everything with data and AI, but they actually used a machine learning based system to actually improve the matchmaking system, especially in areas where to pick what is the best vehicle and what is the best route, and they are able to improve actually even by like 30%. In terms of being able to deliver on time. It's kind of impressive what they are able to do. And they are continuing to keep actually improving the accuracy and the time of delivery.
Are there other places around the world where you see big progress being made?
Actually, the other place, one of our customers, Aramex, they are a global, logistics and transportation company as well. And they get something like thousands of requests every minute. All the way, and one of the constant challenges that they are also trying to see is how do you predict accurately as you can in terms of time of delivery. And so again, this the same theme of actually being able to collect huge amount of data from past and present, and able to use like machine learning techniques. So they saw a jump of up to like 74% improvement in prediction accuracy. That led to something like drop in 40% of customer calls related to escalation.
Well, I assume that means we'll also soon have the equivalent of Waze to tell us when our packages, where my UPS package is, when it's going to arrive at the door. All of that should be coming pretty quickly, shouldn't it?
Yeah, it's in a lot of cases it's there. So, but there's still variations in terms of how long the person in front of you takes, kind of thing. But yeah, we're all moving in that direction of moving to more predictive AI and the next levels of it.
Now, the whole U.S. is being rewired for e-commerce. And so we used to build buildings on the edge of cities, they deliver into the city. Now our clients, especially Amazon, wants us to put buildings as close to the inner city as we can. So it's a huge opportunity. We're doing a lot of brownfield redevelopment, cleaning up old factories, putting in brand new distribution e-commerce facilities right in town because the clients want 2-hour delivery. So you're seeing these buildings coming close to town, and then as we develop these buildings, one day we'll probably put vertiports on top of these buildings. And so the newer buildings can adapt. In the multifamily world, we're building in San Francisco. We build huge lot. It used to be a mailroom. Now it's big e-commerce delivery centers inside the building to make it easier and easier. So the development community will adapt with product that'll work. It's going to be the older building reuse is where you're going to have an issue, I think.
Yeah, well, that is a big issue, is old infrastructure. I mean, it takes decades for infrastructure to turn over. Scott, you've talked about that before, and that will slow adoption.
Yeah, so I think when you think about adoption, there's sort of 3 or 4 factors. One is the technology ahead of regulation and the ability of government to sort of keep pace. What's really interesting, and we just did this study we've been working with the World Economic Forum for the last 3 years on seamless integrated mobility, which is more about the movement of people in cities. But we found that they're really like a set of design constraints. Do you optimize the individual route, in this case of a single package, or do you optimize the system, right? How do you find the right trade-offs and balances? Is it led by the public sector or the private sector? The public sector clearly doesn't have the capital to lead the technology, but what role do they play in opening their environment, and do they get, you see in different cities, some will upfront a priori kind of close the window in terms of innovation. Others are much more open and say, come and we'll regulate as we go along. Then there's the capital and the funding, and like, where is this coming from? And so we're really focused on how do you bring this ecosystem together to actually get to the other side of this, because if we get it right, the benefits and the value are enormous on all sorts of different levels. I think the one other topic that might be worth talking a little bit about is there's going to be a big transition in employment as it relates to all of this. And it's not about that automation's going to do away with everything, because there are going to be all new jobs, but there's an adaptation that has to happen.
There are going to
around
be
that.
different jobs.
Yeah, very much so.
But before we do that, I do want to talk about that. I just want to stick for a minute with this coordination problem, because the beauty of Davos, of course, the reason the streets are so crowded is everybody's here. You've got the government officials, you have the CEOs, and you can start to bring together and have that conversation. But it is a massive people coordination problem. Texas is probably a fairly favorable environment to do it, but all the people you have to get aligned to make the ecosystem work make this an extraordinarily complicated undertaking.
Well, I mean, Texas is new compared to the rest of the world. And we're very high growth, and our cities are basically new. And we'll have our bicentennial in 2036, only 200 years old. And we're moving, 300 people a day are now moving into Dallas-Fort Worth, 115, 20,000 people a year. So you're on a very high growth rate. And so everything is new, so you've got a chance to embed this new product and new design right from the beginning. And that's very helpful for us. But at least you can beta test, and you can find out what does work. And as you build from scratch, you can try these new ideas a lot easier than you can going back into an older city.
Yep.
You perfect it with us, then you roll it out across the country.
Yep.
I think the other thing I would say is it's also the role, going back to the ecosystem, we haven't talked about the consumer. And so part of it's also about how do you create the right incentives for consumers to make decisions. We haven't spoken about the environmental impacts, but obviously there's some environmental impacts from all of this, whether it's congestion, air quality, or carbon. And how do you make sure that as we look at all these moves in the future, and all these movements of parcels in the future, how do we build in the right nudges for the consumer to make decisions that fit with what they need, when they need it, but maybe in a way that is better for the entire ecosystem? And that's something we have to think about as well.
So Penny, there's sort of this prevailing thing in the press, not to pick on you, Alan, that sort of consumers want it now and yesterday. But you've done research and you've actually talked about it, that there's a much more nuanced picture of consumer expectations. And I think you should share some of that, because that nuance is really important as you begin to think about this whole system.
Yeah, so
Sorry, Alan, I don't mean to steal your...
No, you do mean to steal, but it's okay.
no, I think we recently did a survey of customers, and we said how many of you absolutely have to have the fastest delivery method every time? And it was 6%. 94% of consumers and our customers indicated they could have it on a different time frame. So I went and I ordered a bunch of stuff on Cyber Monday in the US. I have to admit, I just moved back to the United States. I was living overseas for 12 years. And on Cyber Monday, I ordered a bunch of stuff, and stuff showed up the next day. Well, frankly, I didn't need it for a few weeks. I was buying it for Christmas. I just needed to know it was going to be there on Christmas Day. So the question was if somebody had maybe nudged me a little bit and said, hey, for $2 or $3, if you'll take it on Friday, we'll give you a credit, I might have made a different choice than having somebody deliver it to me the next day.
So I do this all the time when I shop in Amazon. They give me actually a credit, like $1 or $2 digital credits for like buying a movie in Amazon Video, Prime Video, or so forth. So, and most of the stuff that I order, I don't even open my boxes when they arrive. I do it over the weekend. So I'm like, I will always take the credit and let it arrive a few days later. So
Interesting.
yeah.
So let's go back to the jobs issue that Scott raised, because Penny, I'm sure when the people at UPS hear David Abney saying, "Hey, autonomous is coming and it's coming within the year," it makes a lot of people nervous.
Yeah, Yeah, well, I think that's one of the things. So we're one of the world's largest, traders too. We're a trading company, and there's a lot of nervousness around trade, which I also think is linked to technology. So absolutely, and you have to have the right programs in place to be skilling up your workforce and helping them make those transitions. And right now, we still need a lot of conventional, but we also need some new skills. We need data scientists. That's been a whole new field, I think, that's been created in the past few years. And those are the kinds of things we see. The drone industry, the predictions of what the drone industry is going to create in terms of both value as well as jobs is quite large. So those are the kinds of things we see, but we have to help people make those transitions.
So what have you done at UPS in order to deal, if this is coming that fast, this transition is going to be faster than any previous technology transition. What have you done to help people make it to the other side?
So we are doing quite a bit of, we are doing training, but we also have a natural, as you may know, we run programs in the United States with universities where a lot of our workforce are people who are also going to college. And so they work for us for 4 or 5 years, and we help pay for their college expenses. And then at the end of that period, they have a degree and they go do stuff. And so that natural circulation and that skilling is something that we have embedded in our DNA, and we've done that for many, many years.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at.
Yeah.
And then how do you take and transition people and continue to do that kind of rotational experience in order to make sure you're developing people that can do these different
Amazon
jobs.
has all the same issues, right? Maybe not at AWS, but the people working in the warehouses and the...
No, actually, so Amazon, what we have done is, first of all, just to set context, I'm a big believer and optimist about technology. I always think humans are amazing at actually what they do, and technology should fill in the gaps on taking away all the redundant, boring things and let humans do what they're really good at, which is being creative and solve amazing problems. That said, the issues such as how do you upskill actually workforce and so forth are real. That's one of the reasons why even in Amazon, like internally, we built something called Machine Learning University that we offer for all our engineers and actually all employees. Now we are completely made it open source available for the entire world. Then the next thing what we have done is we also done something called Amazon Future Engineer Program, where we take it to also high schools and also other universities so that they can actually get educated about actually cloud technologies, data science, and various other aspects so that we can actually get even the future workforce really ready for taking on the new technology boom.
But we probably need those programs to be multiplied by a factor of about 10 or 100 to deal with the magnitude of the challenge.
I agree. I'll just give you one anecdote. So when we open source and made the entire Machine Learning University free, within 48 hours, 100,000 people registered. So that is kind of the demand and scale we have. Like it is, and I'm pretty sure that, and it is one of the most popular courses that is available right now on AWS. And there is a huge demand. But again, this speaks to actually the creativity of human mind. We are always knowledge seekers. We want to learn new things and be challenged. So I actually think this is a good thing overall where we will...
That's an optimistic viewpoint. Some people are scared of new things, right?
No, but I think
it's a balance.
Go back to truck drivers, and you have automated trucks coming, and it's going to be a company like UPS that does it first. They're big and they're sophisticated. Those drivers are still going to be needed, because I doubt you'll start... I would not let a truck out by itself and say, good luck, hope you make it to Chicago. I'd have it in a convoy. I'd have a real driver and say, look, let the truck follow you or you follow it, and you watch it. And then you're going to have real truck drivers in the command center, and they're going to monitor these trucks. If a truck gets in trouble, you're going to need a real driver to take that truck over and get that truck out of trouble. At the Air Force, go back to the military, the drone pilots for the U.S. Air Force are fully trained pilots. They're F-16 pilots, C-17 pilots. They fly the drones, not a technician. These are pilots that understand flying, and they help that drone if it needs it. So truck drivers will be doing the same thing.
How much training did those military pilots?
It takes a year to get your wings in the Air Force. So these are, and then to be combat qualified, it's probably $3 to $4 million per pilot that could be in an aircraft that's now flying a drone. So it's a very
$3 to $4 million worth of training.
Yes.
So you're going to have to do the same thing with truck drivers? And
No. Truck drivers are already trained. So
No, I mean to train them, but there has to be additional training
Well, I'm talking about
to
to
get
fly
you.
an F-16.
But to get from flying an F-16.
These are apples and oranges. So
Yeah, okay, so when you move from being-
I confused the topic.
Here's
Alan.
no, you didn't confuse it. I think this is an important question. When you've been doing Apple and then you move to Orange, when you've been flying an F-16 and suddenly you're in a drone command center,
Right.
that requires some training.
It does. And so the truck driver, a veteran truck driver, knows the route, knows the truck, knows the weather. He understands what that robot's now doing. And so once you get to the point in the learning curve where the truck's on its own, you're still going to have a human driver watching and the ability to take that truck over and command it.
What's the alliance?
Because I'm going back to the military.
I get it.
If the drones get in trouble, these pilots take over, they fly it, and come in and land it.
I get it. In the Alliance for Texas, what's the? How are you dealing with the skills question? If you're going to create the future, you're going to need people with a different
We
set of
have,
skills.
because of our growth rates and because North Texas is very affordable. Average home price is $270,000, $280,000.
So you're bringing them in.
We're bringing them in. We're bringing them in by the truckloads. 85,000 people moved from California to Texas last year. You know, Charles Schwab just announced moving his headquarters from San Francisco to Alliance, right next to Deloitte. So you're seeing the talent coming in to man it, and a lot of these skills because of our embedded military base. We have a very large active and retired military base. These military men and women are perfect to go into these jobs.
Yeah. So this has been a fascinating conversation. You guys each bring a different perspective to it, which is very helpful. But I wonder if we can end the conversation by asking you if there was one thing you could make happen to speed up this future and to ensure that it's a positive future. What would that one thing be? What would you like to see happen? I'll let anyone. I'm not going to put you on the spot. Anyone, whoever wants to go first.
Great question, but you'll be shocked when you see what's in the system. And we just finished Texas Up, and we brought 150 of the mobility experts from around the world in, and the new products that are coming are stunning, the flying products.
Yeah.
And so, to me, the entrepreneurial spirit of the nation and the world is in full gear. Billions are being invested. Extraordinarily smart people who've been successful in high tech are now into aviation, into drones, and you've got products coming that untrained people can get into by themselves and fly with no training. That's it's here. And it's
So
being
let it
tested.
happen, basically.
Let it happen. Keep the optimism. Be realistic. It's going to take longer than we think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not an if, it's a when. But be open-minded because it will happen. And to me, the government officials that watch this, believe in it, help your entrepreneurs, let them be successful.
Swami.
I would second that. I mean, I'm very, very optimistic about where the future is headed. And innovation is happening in a big way across, different countries and also in different parts of this industry. And again, the key thing is they are actually trying innovative ideas and being very data-driven, powered by machine learning and AI and various technologies, all the way from like the onboard hardwares in some of these autonomous vehicles, from trucks and drones to actually the decision making, coupled with actually humans teaching machines what they can do. So it's almost like a very, very exciting future.
Yeah. Penny.
So I think I'm going to go back to where we started a little bit with how we've deployed drones. So in a year's time, I'd like to see us continue to deploy use cases that are saving lives and that are providing those solutions and focusing specifically on those solutions that are really value add for our society. I think we'll get to delivering our Starbucks by drone someday. Hopefully, I won't be under that drone. But
it's a
but
really
the
great
humanitarian
point,
is what I
and
really
it goes
like.
back to the trust point. It's a really great point. You know, somebody said to me one time, the reason so many people in society turned against GMO technology was because its first application was to create these tomatoes that looked really good and stayed on the shelf looking good for a long time, but tasted horrible. It said if you can roll out the technology in a way that creates obvious benefits for society, the trust will follow. So I think it's a great, really important point.
I think the last thing is we need new models of collaboration. I was at a panel yesterday where there was a professor from the University of London, and she talked about ecosystems are the rage, And she said, but I think there are two types of ecosystems if you go back to botany. There's parasitic ecosystems and mutualistic ecosystems. And I really like that term, mutualistic. It's a little academic, but I actually think that's, if we're going to realize the potential of all this enormous technology, of the digital technologies to stitch this together, to actually make it happen in terms of day-to-day, the operation, we're going to need different forms of collaboration. And that includes the public sector in ways that we haven't really seen.
Yeah.
So that's not a one-year thing.
Yeah.
But we have to change the way we approach this.
So all we need is a mutualistic ecosystem, and then we're and we're there. Thank you, all four of you. Really fascinating conversation. We'll see how this unfolds over the next few years, but it's clear, really exciting things are happening.
Alan, thank you. Penny, Ross, Swami, thank you very
Thank you
much.
all.
Yes, our live audience. Woo! Thanks.